Okay, so I'm Donna Bulger, and you'll learn a little bit more about me in my first screen. I'm just going to share my screen. I have a PowerPoint with some information. Today, we're just going to be discussing confronting ableism in education. And I didn't really isolate it to any specific education. I think it's prevalent in all forms of education, whether they be elementary, high school, or post-secondary. Ableism is very dominant in all of those areas, in my belief. All right. So, yeah, just trying to encourage awareness about ableism and human rights and the reality of disability and things that people living with disability need to face on a daily basis. So, like I said, I'm Donna Bulger, and I was born with a mobility disability, spina bifida. And typically, I don't always identify right off the bat, but I figured today it might give me a little bit of street cred. Um, in that it will allow me to bring some lived experience to this conversation. I'm a former elementary school teacher and am now a computer graphic artist. I'm an advocate for the disabled population as well and work with the JHC Communications Department and the Voices of Albertans with Disabilities as part of one of their presenters. So, what does the Voice of Albertans with Disabilities actually do? Quite a lot. They will bring awareness of barriers and support in reducing them and finding solutions to them. They will develop some disability awareness presentations, such as this, educating individuals, organizations, schools, legislatures, employers, the public sector, basically anyone who might be interested in learning and becoming more aware of people living with disability and what they face. They also support and provide referral for individuals. They do accessibility assessments. And I think most of their work is categorized in 5 main categories: disability awareness, projects and research, support and referral, as mentioned here, collaborations with partners, also bursaries. They have an Education for Life bursary, which provides financial assistance to post-secondary students with disabilities. Accessibility assessments would be their 5th category. So, as we developed this presentation, we came across this quote from Nelson Mandela, which we thought was very appropriate. We do not need the patronage of non-disabled. It is not for us to adapt to the dominant and dominating world of the so-called non-disabled. It is for them to adapt their understanding of a common humanity, to learn of the richness of how human life is diverse, to recognize the presence of disability in our human midst as an enrichment of our diversity. The gist of this, I believe, each of us is diverse in our own way. We each have strengths to offer and weaknesses to improve upon. This diversity is what makes life interesting. So the World Health Organization's definition of disability is very robust and comprehensive, actually. Disabilities is an umbrella term covering impairments, activity limitations, and participation restrictions. An impairment is a problem in body function or structure. An activity limitation is a difficulty encountered by an individual in executing a task or action. And while a participation restriction is a problem experienced by an individual in involvement in life situations. So, for example, my mobility disability, my legs won't work. So the limitation is that I can't climb stairs. But the participation restriction that I will face is maybe not being able to go to the hall dance with my family or friends or a wedding because it's upstairs and there's no elevator in the old building. There's also invisible disabilities that suffer some pretty major restrictions as well. Brain injury, for example, or autism may be restricted in picking up on visual or social cues. Their activity limitation may be that they're not really comfortable interacting in a social setting. And the participation restriction, that may come directly from the people that they're in the setting with, in that they can't relate to them, or the people that they're with, can't relate to them. They may feel left out at a school dance because people just don't understand why they don't behave normally or the way that we all tend to expect in our ableist views. When I forgot to mention, please do go ahead and place things in the chat. I'm monitoring it, but if I do miss something, I will get to it at some point. Continuing on with the definition of disability, it's not just a health problem. It's a complex phenomenon. It reflects the interaction between features of a person's body and the features of the society in which he or she lives. Overcoming the difficulties faced by people with disabilities requires interventions or accommodations to remove environmental and social barriers. Disability covers many conditions, some visible and some invisible, as I mentioned earlier. A disability may have been present from birth, could be caused by an accident, or acquired over time. There are physical, mental, and learning disabilities, mental disorders, hearing or vision disabilities, epilepsy, drug and alcohol dependencies, environmental sensitivities, and other conditions, many other conditions. Some stats from Canada. The most current survey taken, or one that we had found, was in 2017. And in that, more than 22% of Canadians identified as having a disability. That's about 6.2 million individuals in Canada. 1 in 5 people. I believe Rabia actually said something different this morning, which was also kind of supportive of the fact that there's enough of us out there that changes should be made. That's 22%, according to this survey, of Canadian population aged 15 years or over. We can assume this percentage may actually be low, given that not everyone will actually identify as having a disability due to the negative connotation that's often attached to it. And with the growing number of seniors in Canada, the potential for this number to increase is great. As we have probably learned, disability does not discriminate. Young, old, we can all be that, become that. So what exactly is ableism? Until I started working more fully in advocacy 3 years ago, I actually didn't know what ableism was. And I've had my disability all of my life, and I'm sure that I have encountered many instances of ableism, but I just didn't know that there was actually a label that was attached to it. Ableism is discrimination based on the belief that there was one right way to have a body and or a mind. Ableism includes actions, thoughts, policies, and systems that people engage in which dehumanize and isolate disabled people. Systemic is a huge issue and cause of ableism. Because ableism focuses on bodies dictating what makes a normal or worthy body and what does not, ableism is something that can be experienced by anyone with a body, which is to say, anyone who is alive, disabled or non-disabled. Effects of ableisms are compounded with other marginalized groups. For example, if an African American is also a person living with a disability, they may likely get a double whammy, either in education or in society. Types of ableism. Like many other isms, ableism is systemic. Long believed and conditioned behaviors or reactions to people living with disabilities. Ableism can be casual or unconscious, indirect, unnoticed actions or behaviors that marginalize individuals, often unintended and possibly even done by the allies of people living with disabilities. For example, teachers assuming a task can be done in the time allotted by all children. Not necessarily the case. Not considering the needs of all students when planning class or school activities. I can actually find myself being ableist because of this unconscious behavior, and as it is because it is so ingrained. I'll be ableist with myself, believing I'm not enough or won't do well at some things. I also have to check myself at times when I'm in public and I see someone with an invisible disability acting differently. I'm starting to question my judgment, and I'm finally questioning if there is a disability involved with how that person is acting, rather than making assumptions. But it is a challenging thing to unlearn these behaviors because they are so conditioned. Casual or unconscious ableism is like downplaying or tolerating other students' bullying tendencies towards students with disabilities, or assuming students with disabilities can't take on leadership roles, or not even giving them the chance to try, just assuming they can't. Ableism can also be deliberate or intentional. Blatant and intentional behaviors against individuals with disabilities. Ableist slurs or inappropriate language, violence against fellow students with disabilities. As a teacher, possibly disciplining students for behavior related to their disability, or segregating students with disabilities from their peers. So automatically you're being excluded and certainly not included. As teachers, we may even feel that we're doing them a benefit by doing that, but it really isn't. So this activity, the idea behind this exercise is to give you an idea of what people with disabilities go through in their daily lives, but it also helps to bring awareness to any privilege we may have in a very ableist society. This is completely anonymous and is used for self-awareness only. Just to become aware of if we do have privilege, and to become aware that some of us do not have privilege. And I find when I go through these questions, I do have a lot of privilege. And going to this convention, it's only reinforced that even more. I have been blessed with a lot of great things in my life, despite living with a disability. So the first question, if you answer yes to any of these first 7 questions, just consider them a part of your privilege backpack, and you can pack them in there like students do with books. Can you reach the top of your fridge? I cannot, and sometimes I'm kind of okay with that because I really don't like dusting, but my cat can get up there, so she's often used as a little Swiffer to get rid of some of the dust. Number 2, are you in charge of planning your day independently on your own? This is a moment of privilege for me because I can certainly plan my day, but there are many in the disabled population who cannot and do rely on the assistance. Number 3, can you cross the street independently and safely? Again, this is kind of a moment of privilege for me. I am able to cross the street independently. Safety might be a little challenging if any of you have gone to Mark's building session just prior to this one. If things are not built well or the slopes cutouts are unlevel, these front casters hit a lip, and I will basically do a lip stand. So not always safely. Please excuse my voice. I'm just coming off of a cold. Number 4, do you understand every word a retail clerk says to you? I personally do not, but I don't think it's ableism or disability that's causing that. I think I'm just starting to get old. So my hearing is kind of slipping a bit. If the elevator is out of order, can you take the stairs? Of course, with a mobility disability, I cannot. And it something like this actually forces me to disclose my disability maybe a little sooner than I wanted to. For example, if I'm going to an interview and I get in for the interview or I get a call for the interview, I have to identify right off the bat that I am a person who uses a wheelchair for my mobility, and are they accessible? I don't want to arrive and find out that A, they're not accessible, so I wouldn't be able to get the job anyways, or B, give them a shocked sort of feeling or sensation when they see me sitting there in a wheelchair. When it snows, are you able to get to work if the sidewalks aren't clear? For me, it really depends on whether or not how unclear they are. I can manage pretty well. I've been using my chair for as long as I can remember. But I suddenly become an ice skater when in my chair when there's pretty icy or snowy sidewalks. Number 7, are you able to have a verbal conversation on the phone? Again, this is a moment of privilege for me because I actually am. But those of us who have hearing deficiencies or comprehension problems may not have that privilege. The next 3 questions, if you answer no to them, then put it in your ableism backpack. Number 8, have you ever been asked if your spouse has a disability? I personally have not. I also don't have a spouse, but it's interesting to know that a lot of the people in my population have been asked this question if they do have a spouse or a partner. And it's almost the expectation that if you have a disability, then your spouse or partner must also have a disability, which is quite ableist. Number 9, have you ever been asked if you were born this way? This one I have been asked, and I choose to use it as a teachable moment. So yeah, I was born this way, and I've had a pretty fulfilled life, even despite being born this way. And finally, number 10, have you ever been asked just to behave or move normally or pay attention? This is one that I haven't really been asked of anybody, but in some situations where you're in church maybe, or where you're maybe doing the Canadian anthem, and the expectation is that you would stand, I will often have people kind of bending and whispering towards me and saying, "You're supposed to stand," which I know the intention is humor, but it still makes me feel kind of weird because I feel bad not being able to honor that Canadian anthem or that particular spot in church where most of us are standing. The daily living of a person living with a disability. Every human being has the human right to enjoy active lives, doing things needed to become thriving, successful, well-adjusted, included, and valued people in the world. For example, playing at all ages, socializing, again, at all ages, going to school, preschool, elementary school, high school, campus, university, post-secondary, They also have the right to develop a career, care for a family, their home, and live an enriched life, and all without feeling or being excluded or isolated. With the right accommodations, people living with disabilities can have those same life choices as their equal parts, counterparts. So, the role of education in confronting ableism should ensuring that people living with disabilities be included and valued fall squarely on education. It's where most of us get some of our first chances to succeed, take risks safely, and build confidence and self-esteem outside of our family. Here's where you're very welcome to share any comments as well in the chat, because I would be very interested in your opinion. Because what I think is that society in general, those who typically direct how schools operate, the decision makers, the government officials, board members, parents, etc., play critical roles in changing the attitudes, which have to date been so deeply embedded, many of us don't even recognize that some of our ableist prejudices come forth. Ableist barriers often go unnoticed or are even normalized. In what ways can education be ableist? Again, I'm going to call on people to feel free to take the time to share your thoughts in the chat before I reveal what I think my answers might be to this question. So, a lack of accessibility in schools, learning spaces, in playgrounds, field trips, and I see in the chat that ableism doesn't account for different learning styles. Absolutely, that's coming up as well. Segregating students with and without disabilities. Thank you very much for those suggestions. I don't even know if I need to be here. You guys are on top of it. Field trips, for example, when I was younger, and I don't really think that much has changed since I was in elementary school, my parents, one or both of them, had to take time off work to be able to transport me to where the rest of my class was going for the field trip. Whereas some of these field trips, some of the students, or all of the students, are being basically taken to these field trips on a bus. And often on that bus, they're given some sort of sweet treat or lunch or something that, again, I'm excluded from experiencing when my parents are driving me. There's also a lack of accessibility with classes in general and programs. Again, another example I would bring up in my high school was gym. When they were teaching about volleyball or basketball or dodgeball or any of those, well, of course, the assumption was I couldn't participate in any way, shape, or form. So I was excluded again, sent to the library to write a report on volleyball, basketball, whatever the topic was at that time. University buildings, we touched on this a little bit earlier. Campus, when I went to university, it was extremely challenging in its ableism and ableistic buildings, a lot. But I think it was mentioned in one of the sessions that I've gone to here is a lot of these buildings are historical. And so the intention is that you can't really change a historical building, or it's been built so long ago that it would take much more money to try and get it to the point where a person with a disability could access it without barrier. Another ableist thing that can happen in education is doubting a person's disability, whether it be a learning disability, an attention deficit, a visual or auditory disability, mental or cognitive disabilities. And as I mentioned earlier, if you are doing a more overt sample of ableism. If you are scolding someone or disciplining them because of their behavior and it is a direct result of their disability, that's kind of scary, actually, in my opinion. Learning styles not being addressed, and this is what, let's see, yes, Rochelle had mentioned. People are, and whether they have disabilities or not, they can be tactile learners, visual learners, auditory, or need a lot of practice. Tactile learners in math, for example, I was terrible at math. So at the time, math manipulators weren't that popular. But as I was teaching, math manipulators became more popular. So a person could actually work with little bits to demonstrate tens, or removing 3 from 10 and getting 7, visually counting and feeling that there were 7 pieces. Some people are auditory learners, and some people just learn best if they get a chance to practice. And this convention was a fine example. As one of the administrative, I was challenged to try and figure out how Hopin worked. But the more I practiced, the easier it did become for me. Another way that education can be ableist is providing limited choices in learning activities, in spaces, in the technology or communication supports. A lack of accommodations or being treated like a burden if accommodations were made. Many of us already feel like we are putting people out if we have to ask for an accommodation. So if I get the sense that someone feels like I am a burden, that's only going to magnify my own self-doubt and self-esteem. Putting undue attention on students with disability. Making assumptions. Well, they can't do this. They'll never get this. They'll certainly never make friends. And they need help with everything. Some of those assumptions are just not true. You just need to give them a chance to show you how they can do it. Speaking down to students, or the use of inappropriate language. For example, the word retarded, slow, unable. Oh, that girl in that chair over there, or the boy with the hearing aids. They have names. We all have names usually. So we will strongly recommend that we use first-person language. Call them by their name. Condoning or using ableist phrases in the classroom. For example, oh, it's the blind leading the blind. Or, well, that's lame. They're acting kind of crazy. The word handicapped has become very negative. You're so special, or you're such an inspiration. Well, why am I such an inspiration when all I did is come to school? I haven't done anything else to become an inspiration per se. Calling out a student in front of their peers if they need a break or if they didn't complete work in time given. Not taking the time to find strengths or allowing students to learn and shine in things they love to do. I know in schools now it is extremely hard. I've been out of the school system for a while, but I still have family members who are teachers. And the time that's involved in getting to know these students and their strengths and teaching to those can be overwhelming. I understand that completely. What I had done when I was teaching, I first started in a special needs class, which is also starting to develop a bit of a negative connotation. But I had a young boy a young Indigenous boy actually, who could not read. But he was absolutely extraordinary with his hands and sculpting. So one of the things that I tried to do was have him dictate a story of the beautiful dragon that he had sculpted to me. And I wrote it down, then I turned it to him, and he was able to track enough of that story that he was able to read back his story. So he found success not only in something he loved to do, but also in being able to read his own story. Including students with disabilities as tokens or anomalies. Nobody wants to be a token or, oh, isn't that nice with the pat on the head. Answering for a student with a disability. They need as many opportunities to use their own voices in order to feel included. I see another couple of comments, and yes, you do. I enjoy the ableism. Okay. And Robert mentioned that schooling is attuned to the industrial age, where social conformity is the goal. And that is so true. And that is ableism. If that's probably one of the easiest ways to explain ableism. A good historical account of schooling is in the book Weapons of Mass Instruction by Gatto, is an eye-opener. So I guess the general gist of this is that authenticating students and teachers in education with disabilities by hearing their experiences, letting them use their own voices, and giving them chances and choices to direct their own lives will go a long way in confronting ableism, and will likely carry through to society in much more meaningful ways. If they're already used to being comfortable and confident in the classroom, that may carry through to society. Unlearning ableisms. Ableist belief systems and biases are often learned over years and perpetuated by society as a whole. As we learned, ableism is systemic. As an individual, it will take self-discipline and mindful practice to start to question and challenge your immediate responses and recognize ableist attitudes in yourself. And it's going to be uncomfortable, and I can speak to that personally, as I mentioned earlier. You start to recognize it in yourself and you start to think, oh my gosh, I guess I am ableist. As a school initiative, I believe this is possible to do, but it will take the buy-in of the administration, the staff, parents, and any other stakeholders to collectively work toward unlearning ableism, changing policies, doing professional development with teachers, changing policy around how students with disabilities are included, or how schools can be changed to make them more accessible. Awareness workshops such as this are only some of the ways that the bias can start to be changed. And change needs to happen. Student social interactions. This kind of speaks to the first person language. Encourage your classmates to be tolerant, accepting, and open-minded. And this isn't just for people living with disabilities or students living with disabilities. This is for everybody. It's a common human nature. And just to describe, there's a little girl who uses a wheelchair to get around, and two other little girls walking up to her. Do we call you handicapped or disabled? The little girl just kind of shrugs and says, call me Charlotte. That's my name. We don't have to label everything and everybody. That's another very ableist mentality, I believe. Katrina has brought up that she loves the book Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto that helped her look at teaching outside of the system, from a kaleidoscope of view to the true needs of the student and their method of learning. Dignity is crucial in all education. Dignity is the state or quality of being worthy of honor or respect. It's the right of a person to be valued and respected for their own sake. So the intention and the impact gives us an opportunity to react to an offensive statement. We can either ignore it or we can use it as a teachable moment and try and explore it a little bit in your classrooms. For example, if something is said that is deemed as insulting, well, discuss. Was it meant to be mean? Was it meant to be an insult? And kind of just talk it through with your students. They may not verbally say, oh yeah, I kind of screwed up and I did mean to be mean, but I think it would hit the mark. Students are not, they are very aware, and I think they would pick up on their own behaviors very quickly. It's important that we give students with disabilities or children with disabilities, adults with disabilities, the chance to risk, to take risks. And certainly in school, you're in a safe environment for the most part. You can take those risks. For example, if the student, if the assignment was to do a presentation, and the student living with a disability is very nervous about that because they haven't really ever done it and they're going to be in the spotlight, and just give them the chance and practice it with them, just you and her, him, and give them the chance to get used to the idea of doing it in front of the classroom and let them take that risk. As was mentioned before, quite often people living with disabilities need some extra time to think through, or if cognitive disability is a factor, they may need that time just to be able to figure out what's being asked of them, what's being expected of them. Give them that time. They'll figure it out. One thing that I can honestly say about people living with disabilities, and again, it's coming from my own lived experience, is that we are very good problem solvers, even at a young age. We will find a way to do it because we don't want to stand out. So how can we recognize and avert ableism? Language is a big one here. You can't versus how can language. So instead of saying to that student with a disability, well, you can't do that, switch it around a little bit and say, well, how do you think you can do that? Like I said, we're all really good problem solvers. Excuse me, I'm just going to clear my throat a bit. Sorry about that. They can figure out a way how they might be able to do it, and then they can practice it. If it doesn't work, well, then you come up with another strategy. Believe people when they disclose that they have a disability. That's a big one. We know our bodies. We know what we're capable of doing. Listen to people when they request an accommodation. We're not just asking for special treatment. We can succeed if we are given what we need to succeed. Don't assume that you know what someone needs. And this all goes back to what we've probably all heard a lot today, is nothing about us without us. We must be included in the direction of our own lives. You can't assume what someone will need, but they probably know what they will need. Don't speak on behalf of someone with a disability unless they explicitly ask you to. One of the gentlemen, I think the young gentleman that was speaking this morning, basically said, we've got people going to restaurants and they're asking the friends who are with them versus asking the person living with a disability what they might want to eat. Talking about disability in classrooms, and I'm not talking about the specific child with the disability. I'm just talking about it in general. I don't like the word normalize, but it will start to normalize. Kids will come to be familiar with people who do live with disabilities. Talk about grandpa or grandma, or maybe even mom, or someone who's had an accident, who's broken their leg. It's disability. It may not be permanent disability, but it helps to normalize it. So it's not such an anomaly. One of the most important things to do to push back against ableism is to make sure people with disabilities are at the table where decisions are being made. Now, this can be difficult for school-age children, no question, but they can still have some ownership of their lives by letting them speak for themselves, by letting them take those risks and do that presentation in front of the class, by giving them the choice if maybe that day they're not having a great day. So give them the chance to be in control of that. Tips that you might be able to use to guide classmates in interacting with their peers who are living with disabilities. One of the most important things I think you can teach all of your students is just to be relaxed and to be themselves. We all want to feel needed and valued. Treat each person as an individual, not a disability. Ask what would make them most comfortable. Be respectful and be considerate. Tell students to not assume that you know what someone needs. When I was in college, a professor asked for people to take notes for others who needed assistance. My hand shot up. I was a keener first-year student. The prof came to me after class and said she was surprised to see my hand raised, as she assumed I would be one of the ones needing the assistance. That's a big assumption. Don't touch or move any equipment that is used by a person with a disability without consent or letting them know that you've done so. In my case, if someone moves my chair and it's not in the same position that it was when I went to transfer, it becomes unsafe for me when I go back to transfer into my chair. Be confident, calm, and reassuring, even if the person exhibits unusual behavior. Focus on how you can help. Accept them. And patience, optimism, and a willingness to find a way to communicate are a classmate's best tools, whether they have disability or not disability. Robert mentioned in BC there is a vision of total inclusivity in comparison to Alberta. That sounds lovely, which seems to be going the other way. But to attain the BC vision will take time and policy change, which is why I mentioned one of the main ways as a school or as a district to make those changes is to get everybody's buy-in and to get everybody to realize just how important this is. We carry some of that negativity all through our lives, and it just gets compounded as we experience a new experience, and we just start to feel worse and worse. And it's hard to unlearn that. So, as we've talked about, there's a lot of barriers that people with disabilities face. And a lot of those barriers are ableist, and I would say the worst one is the attitudinal barriers. So again, in the comments, please feel free to share any barriers that you think might not be included here. I see that I have a connection failure. Can everybody still hear me? If you can give me a thumbs up, that would be awesome. Awesome. Thank you very much, Mackenzie. So barriers people living with disabilities face: environmental barriers, accessibility, institutional barriers, as we mentioned here, not being accepted in school, assumptions being made that we can't do things, communication barriers, assuming that we understood exactly what was being told to us, and when maybe we needed to have it told in a different way or explained differently. Transportation barriers, my example of the field trip where mom and dad had to bring me, or in a lot of ways, I do drive a vehicle, another privilege that I do have in my life, and I'm so thankful for. It was something that my father had encouraged me, strongly encouraged, as in I had no choice, to take the risk to do. But I am so thankful that he did that, because it opened up a whole new world for me. I don't have to rely on DATs or any of those kind of barriers. But like I said, attitudinal barriers are probably one of the hardest to overcome. Just want to look through my notes, make sure I didn't miss anything. And the last slide, we're going to be finishing a little earlier today, but that gives us a chance for questions if there are any. The last slide is, as human beings, we're all looking for quality of life, and that's no different for your student living with a disability or your adult living with a disability. We all have desires and dreams. We all want friends, excuse me, and to be included. We all have passions and wants. We want to be a part of a loving family. We want independence. We want to be able to go to university and get post-secondary. We want to be able to work and develop our career. That would be a whole other session, just talking about employment and how many of us are not even given the chance to develop a career. But the main thing that we want to take out of this particular screen is that we do see our lives as fabulous. I have lived a very fulfilled life. I have nieces and nephews who love me, siblings that I wouldn't be able to do without. I have a beautiful cat that's trapped outside right now, and lovely parents who I honestly believe I would never be where I am right now if it wasn't for those parents and their willingness and ability to push me outside of my comfort level. We have fabulous lives. So now, if there's any questions, I will be happy, or comments, I will be happy to try and address them. If there's any other things you would like to suggest or anything about confronting ableism, whether it's in education or whether it's just in society, because that's a big one. Thank you, Katrina. So the presenters at VAD do like to get your feedback, if that's at all possible. It would take just a little bit of time to fill in this survey. If you would do so, I will put it in the chat. And there's still time for questions. I'm just kind of adding this in. If you would like to fill in that survey, it would be great. We learn from all of your comments, and we try to improve our presentations through all of your comments. If there's no other questions, then I get to play teacher and say, hey, we get to get out early today. Oh, we have one question. Is there anything you would recommend that allies can do in terms of campaigns or requesting any policy changes? That is an excellent question. And that's what I find is the allies confront these barriers as well, because quite often what is stopping the changes from being made are the people who are making the decisions, or the people who have the money, or the government officials. And so if we can reach them and teach them that these are all changes that won't cost a ton of money, but they're all changes that really need to be made in order to include people living with disabilities. I don't have any magic answers, but that might be a start if we can try and reach those public officials who can, and stakeholders, primary stakeholders, who can actually help in changing things. It's great that we're doing awareness, it's great that we're learning, but the general public doesn't really have a lot of power in making changes either. Katrina, if you could make one pivot within our education system, what would it be? My pivot would probably be to really drill home the fact that assumptions and judgments and labels are the worst way to treat children or each other with living with disabilities. Another thing that I would probably strongly recommend, and it was one of the reasons why I got into teaching, is hiring people with disabilities. Again, it may go a long way in normalizing and getting people used to seeing we are capable and we are able, and we are empathetic. We can relate. When I taught grade 3, my students were pretty much the same height as me. So it was wonderful because I was on their level. I wasn't towering over them. I could talk to their level and be an equal to them. Robert says education reform is his crusade. It's kind of mine too. I'd love to be, our disability I would love to have in our curriculum. So again, it may go a little bit towards normalizing and making us less of an anomaly. Mackenzie, you are most welcome. I do love to do this. I do love to share life experiences and try and make some of these changes. And Robert is suggesting to check out 3blockmodel.com. Dr. Jennifer Katz.html on University Diversity Education. I am actually going to copy that right now, Robert, because that sounds very intriguing. If there is anything else, please feel free to just let me know. Otherwise, we are good to go. I don't want to rush you out. I could talk about this stuff all the time. Roll up on my soapbox.